The morning of July the 7th started off very positive. We'd been awarded the Olympics the day before.
It felt like the world was in a good place and London was at the heart of it.
I started work probably about 5 o'clock in the morning, down to the train and got it ready to go out. It was just one day among 1,000. The windscreen in front of me smashed. I couldn't see a thing, everything had just gone absolutely black. I stopped my train immediately. It was quite frightening. I could hear noises, I could hear screaming. I could see a colleague who I recognised, who banged on the window and he just said, Jeff, he said, it's terrible, there's people dead and dying over here.
It was a very surreal moment when I arrived at Edgware Road.
And there wasn't sirens, there wasn't panic, there wasn't screaming. All you could hear was the sound of the shutters of the cameras going click, 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 click.
I saw this woman in a mask and this man was really helping her, and she was the worst victim that I had seen so far. I was thinking, this is the picture, because the image was so striking. And it was a real picture of humanity and at the same time horror. That was the moment that I realised how serious it was. In 2005, I was just starting out as a photojournalist, and I was a stringer for various news organisations, one of which was Associated Press, one of the big agencies, did international stories.
Back in 2005, I got a job at AOL in Hammersmith in London. I was responsible for a team of volunteers who monitored the chat rooms and monitored the message boards.
I started on the Underground in January 1987 as a leading railman and got transferred to work as a guard on the Central Line, and then as a guard motorman after I qualified as a driver, and then eventually as a train operator on the Hammersmith and City Line in 1990, and I've been there pretty much ever since. I'd been involved as a counsellor in Barking and Dagenham with the discussion about whether we should support the bid and how it should go, so I was really rooting for it.
The International Olympic Committee has the honour of announcing that the Games...
I was covering London winning the Olympics bid in Trafalgar Square, and it was like a monumental moment.
Are awarded to the City of London.
Everyone was excited, the crowd there was so happy.
We have the finest capital in the world. We have a unique place in the world, in the centre of the world. We were going to win.
I can't believe it's happening.
It was going to be a brilliant year, and I was excited as well, because I was thinking all the sort of things I was going to be able to photograph in the run-up to the Olympics.
It's been an incredible night, incredible day, incredible experience for me personally, and I'm very proud and very honoured to be part of a team like this.
The morning of July the 7th started off very positive. We'd been awarded the Olympics the day before.
The Metro that day just had a double-page spread of the Olympic rings large across it, and that was just everywhere that morning.
It felt like the world was in a good place and London was at the heart of it.
As the capital bathed in Olympic glory, 4 men headed towards London's rush hour.
I started work that morning about, would have been probably about 5 o'clock in the morning, down to the train and got it ready to go out. It was just one day among 1,000. Every train you went past, you could see just wall-to-wall Olympic rings. And yeah, it was a buoyant mood. Everybody was really, really pumped for it. After leaving Paddington, I came across Praed Street Junction. From there, I could see ahead in Edgware Road that all the platforms were occupied. So as I was slowing down, I could see a train coming out from platform 4, a Circle Line train going the opposite way to me. And as he passed, I could see the driver, he had the light on his cab, and I could see it was a colleague that I knew. I noticed there was a glowing orange ball, and the ball very slowly expanded and passed through to the end of the carriage. The windscreen in front of me smashed. I couldn't see a thing, everything had just gone absolutely black. I stopped my train immediately. It was quite frightening. I could hear noises, I could hear screaming. Was there a collision? Was there a derailment? Then I could hear somebody screaming, "Help me." In 30 years of railway experience, something completely different that I'd never experienced before had just occurred, and I had no idea what was going on. I could see a colleague who I recognised, who banged on the window and he just said, Jeff, he said, it's terrible, there's people dead and dying over here. And I could just see from his face, the look on his face, that it was something really awful that he'd witnessed. Whatever had happened in that other train, it was bad.
I got on a tube train at King's Cross station and started to make my way towards Hammersmith. And just prior to Baker Street station, the tube train stopped. A few minutes later, the tube driver said that due to an incident at Edgware Road tube station, the train would terminate at Baker Street. I remember coming out of the tube train, we all ended up on the street.
As more reports came in of other incidents, photographer Jane Mingay headed towards Edgware Road tube station at the request of her bosses at the Associated Press.
It was a very surreal moment when I arrived at Edgware Road because we didn't know what was going on. It was bizarre at the beginning because nothing was happening. So I just stood there and I was just photographing cordons going up.
I could see further up the road that people were starting to emerge from Edgware Road tube station and that an ambulance response vehicle had pulled up outside that station. I'd previously served time as a firefighter and was naturally drawn to see what was happening.
Back underground, Jeff was in the middle of the incident.
It was my job to deal with the passengers who were on my train and evacuate those probably somewhere between 600 and 800 frightened people. It took us nearly an hour to get the people evacuated from my train, and it was a slow process because it was narrow corridors and a narrow staircase and only a few people can get out at a time.
I spoke to a security guard and said, we need to keep all of these people here together.
I could see in the other train that there was a depression in the floor and a crater. It was obvious then what happened. People were in great pain in the just 2 windows away from us, how close the trains pass to each other.
I spoke to Marks and Spencer's and they said that this group of people could be looked after within their store. And I said, attention please, if you've been involved in the incident, don't leave until you've spoken to a police officer. And that group of people moved into the store.
At that moment, it was absolute chaos.
The people who were starting to arrive now were covered in dust. We had in the region of 200 people injured within the store. There was no time at all for conscious thought. It was just purely decision, decision, decision. A lady was brought in and it was quite obvious that she'd got serious burns. I'd spoken to the ambulance personnel and said, we need some burns dressings. And a lady came out with what looked like a face mask.
We got on the train, 5 seconds later, a massive bang.
After a possible bomb threat, everybody was told to evacuate the store.
And turned to this lady and said, we need to go and we need to go now. And we ran out into the street.
I was standing there and I was obviously photographing what I could in the way that I could. In those situations, you have no choice on the sort of photograph. You just need to be very quick, on alert, grabbing, snapping what you can. And then all of a sudden, I see some people coming out of Marks and Spencer's across the road.
Directly ahead of us was this line of photographers taking our picture. And on the left, you've got these members of the public watching, and there wasn't sirens, there wasn't panic, there wasn't screaming. All you could hear was the sound of the shutters of the cameras going click, 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 click as we progressed across the road.
And it was at that moment that I saw, quite far off, this woman in a mask, and this man was really helping her, and she was the worst victim that I had seen so far. I was thinking, this is the picture, because the image was so striking. Even just seeing it from far off distance, it was a really powerful image because the woman was wearing a mask, so I didn't know what was underneath the mask. I didn't know how bad her injuries were. The way that this man was holding her was so tender and really looking after her, and it was a real picture of humanity and at the same time horror. I think that was the moment that I I realised how serious it was.
On the 7th of July 2005, 4 Al-Qaeda suicide bombers struck London's transport network.
The windscreen in front of me smashed. I stopped my train immediately. I could see a colleague who I recognised, who banged on the window, and he just said, Jeff, he said, it's terrible, there's people dead and dying over here.
As Jane Mingay takes an image that will come to symbolise the attack.
It was a real picture of humanity and, at the same time, horror.
Paul Dadge learns the true scale of what is happening in the capital.
The news was on. At that point, the ticker came across the bottom of the screen and saying bombs explode across London.
Excuse me, madam? Right, I'm pretty certain that's exploded.
Not safe for you to stand here.
It is just indiscriminate attempt at mass murder.
And it was at that point that I realised what was happening. And it wasn't just happening here at Edgware Road, it was happening at Aldgate, it was happening at Tavistock Square, and it was happening at King's Cross. I spoke to a police officer who told me that there was at least 6 people who died. And that upset me greatly, that I hadn't been able to assist those people, and that I'd stayed above ground, and I have a level of guilt about that continues to haunt me to this day.
Police down here!
I managed to send my pictures, and I was using my phone, so I could actually get my pictures out. So I was sitting there with my laptop, literally just after they'd all gone and there was no more victims. I was trying to get that shot particularly out as quickly as I could, because I knew that was the key shot for the day. After about half an hour, I managed to, I think my manager, I did keep trying to call him, couldn't speak to him, then I spoke to him and he said, oh, you've got the front page of the Evening Standard. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because that means it's going to come out soon. I'm going to be sitting here and they're going to deliver it with the image that I had just taken. But then he said, yeah, it's a terror attack. And I just was like, oh my God, I didn't know.
I thought, right, what do I do now? I'll head back to work. And I'd started to carry on walking to work without anyone able to get in touch with me.
Streets open, keep going straight down, first right,
I arrived in the reception at AOL. A guy said to me, are you okay, Paul? Yeah. I didn't know who this guy was, but he knew me. And he said, you need to get up to your floor and see what's happening.
We condemn utterly these barbaric attacks. We send our profound condolences to the victims and their families.
It was going around the world and I was inexperienced, so in a way, I suppose it was exciting because it was my photograph, but then I felt very conflicted because I felt very worried for these people and I was hoping they were okay.
The picture was everywhere. It was on the BBC homepage, it was on CNN. It had gone completely around the world, across the internet in the space of a few hours.
Because you can't see her face, you identify with her. Everyone identifies with her. It could be any of us. That was why it had iconic resonance all around the world. People were picking it up because we could identify with it. That day was the longest day. I continued to photograph on Edgware Road. I continued until nothing else was happening. I just felt like I needed to move on, and then I took pictures of the bus from quite a long way away. But that was also a very eerie atmosphere.
I sat there for the rest of the day as people started to peel off to go home, and there was me and a very senior member of staff left in the building, and he said to me, I'll get you a taxi back to King's Cross.
For tube driver Jeff, it was a day he would never forget.
It was a real, a real community feeling. Everybody felt affected by it. That evening, both my daughters came round and my wife, and we had a very big group hug. As, I think everybody realised in London, it was in London that day, what what a close run thing it was.
We will not allow violence to change our societies or our values. Today's bombings will not weaken in any way our resolve to uphold the most deeply held principles of our societies.
Those who've got such evil in their heart that they will take the lives of innocent folks. This is the war on terror goes on.
I needed to use this image to good effect because it was okay for George Bush and Tony Blair at the time, who were at the G8 summit in Glen Eagles, to say terrorism's bad. But for somebody who could be linked to that terrorist attack and say, I was there yesterday and you won't beat me, and next Monday I'll be back on that tube train again, was a message of defiance that I've continued till this day.
We condemn such barbaric actions that took place in London.
We want to know what kind of bombs and how we think they were planted, and just it'll help us in our surveillance here, miss.
We felt invincible, and this was the moment where we realised that we weren't. That was why it still resonates, that image, because people are reminded that, it can happen to us. The world is not a safe place, no matter where you live.
It is the most surreal feeling in the world to be sat on either a tube train or on a train with people reading stories about you and a picture of you being on the newspaper, and you're sat directly behind somebody. I found that very difficult to deal with, and I've always said that I found the attention from the press a lot more difficult to deal with than the actual terrorist attack itself. As a result of that photo being captured, it's now led to me campaigning against terrorism across the world, and will do whatever I can to provide reassurance and knowledge to victims.
I want to express my admiration for the people of our capital city who, in the aftermath of yesterday's bombings, are calmly determined to resume their normal lives.
London stands together. London's is a multicultural, diverse city, and it won't be cowed by random acts of terrorism.
We believe in the blessing of diversity, in the dignity of difference. Let that unite us now.
This image changed London because it was the first time in the modern era that we felt invincible, and we realised that we are vulnerable and that on home turf things can happen. And I think that what it helped people to do was overcome this adversity and help each other and share a common humanity, and that's had a positive impact.
The media did a good job in not fanning the flames of saying, oh, these are terrible people, we need to do terrible things to them. The story was much more about London's together, London's united, we're not afraid. That was, I think, the slogan of the time.
People who were on a tube train that had been bombed pulled together, and there was this amazing sense of community. It makes me very, very proud to know that the people who were there worked together to help one another.
The minute I took it, and the minute I saw it in the newspapers, it didn't belong to me anymore. It feels so far away from me. I have no authorship of it. It's something that's gone into the collective unconscious and actually belongs to everyone that sees it and had a reaction to it, has empathy for it, has a feeling about it. And I think that's maybe what makes it an iconic picture in a way.
The picture that was taken of us unites the British. It unites people across the world. And it doesn't matter what you do, how many you kill, whether they're young or old. You'll never beat the best of humanity.
You looked across at them, no remorse, just blank faces, deep-set eyes.
I remember as a child my father having newspapers and not wanting us to see.
We do endow women with the better angels of our nature, and here was one that behaved like the devil.
They're shouting, if you don't come down, we'll leave you. And I said, don't care, I'm not coming down. I found something. They gradually moved the soil, and I could see a piece of material, and it was a skirt.
She looks as if she's been caught.
And when they played the tape, she was being tortured, and all she wanted was a mammy.
I would think the vast majority of people in Britain would have liked to have seen them executed.
I would have let her out. And I know that will make people angry.
It's like looking at a devil.
I'd always fancied being in the police, and I applied, and Lancashire came through first. Went through the training procedure, and from there you got your postings. And I was duly posted to Ashton-under-Lyne.
Over a 17-month period between 1963 and 1964, 4 children went missing from Manchester. Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, Keith Bennett, and Leslie Ann Downey. Greater Manchester Police could find no trace of them.
I'd only been there 3 weeks, and all this incidents was happened over in Cheshire, where they'd got a fella murdered, and it turned out Brady and Hindley was the 2 offenders. And the brother-in-law is the one who blew the whistle.
Myra Hindley's brother-in-law, David Smith, had got scared after seeing Brady bludgeon mutual acquaintance Edward Evans to death with an axe.
And he went to a telephone box and phoned the local police and said, there's been a murder. One of the senior officers, they'd gone up, and there's a fellow delivering bread. So they went to him and said, hey, give us your coat. And he went banging on the door, said he was delivering bread. So when they opened the door, they just pushed their way in. And when they'd gone up, they found the chap who'd been butchered.
After the police entered the house, they discovered the bloodied body of Edward Evans. But it would soon become apparent that he wasn't the only victim to die at the hands of Hindley and Brady.
They eventually found in the spine of a Bible a railway ticket for some suitcases. There was so much stuff inside, they realized this is not just a murder. There's tapes, photographs, and it's only when they put the stories together they realize we've a lot of young people who's gone missing. The detectives, they've been watching the television at night, and the photograph came on the screen of Leslie Ann, and they realized that this is one of the photographs in the suitcase. And when they played the tape, she was being tortured, and all she wanted was a mammy and crying out.
It was now becoming clear to the police that this was no ordinary investigation. Also found in the suitcase were photographs taken on Saddleworth Moor, which prompted a search by hundreds of officers across the area.
I'd been down the bottom near the road, and something was taking me up that hill. So I went off on my own. Below was a busy road, but you didn't really get the sound. It was silent. And as I was walking back down, I came across a hole, a depression in the peat. It was filled with water. And sticking up in the middle of it, it looked like a withered stick. So I looked around, got another stick, and prodded into the water. I was prodding something under the water. I'd only been like 3 weeks or so in the job, and I said, I think I found something up there. You come in, nobody wanted to come. Well, if you want, you go back. So I went and got one of these metal rods, which they were using. The idea of the rod was you stuck it in the ground, you pulled it out, and you had a sniff. If there was a decomposed body, you would smell it. And they're shouting, if you don't come down, we'll leave you. And I said, don't care, I'm not coming down. I found something. We drained the water away and gently eased the soil away. And at the side, there was a Scots uniform sergeant. And all I did was get aggravation. I said, well, there's something under there. He said, oh, it'd be a sheep. And at that point, they gradually moved the soil, and I could see a piece of material, and it was a skirt. And I just said, if that's a sheep, it's wearing clothes, and realised it was a female. It was Leslie Ann.
Bob Spear's superior, Detective Chief Inspector Mounsey, was so determined to find the other missing children that he turned to photography to help in the search.
The chap who was our photographer, a fellow called Mike Machida, he'd said to him, meet me up on Saddleworth Moor at the site and bring your camera. And he showed him one of the photographs, and it's Myra Hindley looking down. Showed him the photograph and said, right, use your experience, set your camera up and tell me, where is that spot? He'd duly done it. He said, if you dig about there, and he was about a foot from the spot where John Kilbride was found.
Everyone on newspapers remembers the story. It was so huge, and it was so horrific. And the idea that a woman was involved, we do endow women with the better angels of our nature, and here was one that had behaved like the devil.
I remember as a child my father having newspapers and not wanting us to see. So the Moors murders, for me, stood out as something that was so terrible that my father had not wanted us to know the detail and the content.
A lot of people had difficulty in reading the story. They didn't actually want to read the story. They got the facts, and that was enough for them.
By the 2nd of December 1965, Brady and Hindley had been charged with various counts of murder relating to the missing children and Edward Evans. Whilst in custody, this photograph was taken. It became one of the most iconic crime photos ever.
That photograph of Myra Hindley, the one of this blonde, dyed blonde, hard-looking woman who had done some terribly wicked things, she became iconic as this figure of female evil.
The image seems to reflect the act, that she does look wicked. She looks not remorseful, but as if she's been caught. There's resentment and an extraordinary degree of coldness and cruelty about the picture that's quite frightening if you look at it for a while. It's like looking at a devil.
Only 3 weeks into being a police officer, Bob Spears made a discovery which would shock the nation.
We gently eased the soil away and realised it was a female.
It led to one of the most infamous crime photos ever taken.
She'd composed her features, maybe in shame, for a police mugshot, and it became the definitive photograph of her.
The trial of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley began in April 1966, and on the 6th of May, the jury found Brady and Hindley guilty of murder. Both were sentenced to life imprisonment.
When we went to the magistrates' courts and gave me evidence, and I actually saw them for the first time, you looked across at them, no remorse, just blank faces, deep-set eyes.
They'd swapped positions in the dock. Through the 14 days of the trial, Brady was been sitting on his mistress's right. Today, when they came back after the jury's 2-hour, 20-minute retirement, he was standing on her left. These were 3 calculated, cruel, and cold-blooded murders, was what Mr. Justice Fenton Atkinson said, and I passed the only sentence the law allows.
In those days, there hadn't been a crime like it. Big murders and all the rest, but involving children, and not only murdering the children, it's what they put the people through. He would come along, she would entice them, so much so that one of the lasses, she only lived up the street from her, and the story was, I've lost a glove, will you come and help me to find it? And lass, oh yeah, I know who you are, went off with her, and that was it, never to be seen again.
The bodies of Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett had still not been recovered.
That shot is particularly important because it was dealing with the fact that we are shocked at women committing very serious crimes, still more than we are about men. And the idea that there was a woman who was actually party to the perpetration of acts of perverted cruelty on children, that was the thing that seared into the hearts of people.
Had they not have been caught with that murder, how many more would they have done? There could have been a lot more.
After sentences, he praised the police investigation of the utmost skill and thoroughness which brought these matters to light. Outside, a small crowd of sightseers, most of them staff from the neighbouring county council officers, gathered in the courtyard of the castle to see the prisoners removed. Then the police cleared the forecourt, and as a van with 2 white police cars escorting it swept through the archway of the castle, there was booing from a crowd which had gathered outside.
The death penalty for murder had been abolished in 1965, and some felt that Ian Brady and Myra Hindley had escaped justice for their crimes.
When this crime was committed, there was a tumult of public opinion saying, why have we done away with the death penalty? If anybody deserved the death penalty, it was Ian Brady and Myra Hindley.
I would think the vast majority of people in Britain would have liked to have seen them executed.
For many, the only reason to keep Brady and Hindley alive was the hope that they might lead police to the locations of the final 2 victims.
There is no doubt that sometimes women themselves are very tough on other women who break with what the expectations of society are about how women should behave. And of course, women who are mothers were revolted by Myra Hindley's crimes and were some of the loudest voices in crying for her to be punished and wanting the death penalty for her. But it's still hard. At what stage do you say the risk has sublimated and the public rage has sublimated? Because, of course, the whole idea of justice is that we don't want people to be taking revenge. We don't want people going out and saying, I'm going to bump off Myra Hindley because of the wicked things she did. We want that to be done in the context of the institutions of justice and the punishment to be meted out by us as a community represented by the justice system.
The duration of their imprisonment is now entirely at the discretion of the Home Secretary. The Home Office said tonight that a life sentence means just what it says. Normal practice nowadays is to release a life prisoner on licence after about 10 years. In some recent cases, judges have recommended that the sentences they've passed should not be reviewed for a certain set period, but no such recommendation was made in either case today.
People used to say, as the years went by, and Myra Hindley was the one, I've changed, I'm a good Catholic girl now. And I told people, she's a good Catholic girl. I don't ever want to meet a bad one. Well, she never did get released, but she tried her best.
I acted for Myra Hindley in the 70s, and she was on trial for attempting to escape from prison. It was a plot to escape with, in the dock with her, a woman who was a prison officer, and she had had a lesbian relationship. I went to Holloway Prison to meet Myra. I, of course, was expecting to meet a woman who looked just like that image that I had seen as a child and that I had grown up with, and that was the person I expected to meet. And it wasn't the person I met. She was a woman who looked like a gym teacher. You know, she had short dark hair, she was fit and lithe, and she didn't have that look. She was imprisoned, but she had started self-educating, and she did a degree, and she wanted to talk about books.
But for the mother of murdered Leslie Ann Downey, the memories of having to hear the tortured screams of her child in court cemented her opinion of Hindley.
Ann West told me what was on the tapes, because she'd heard them. She was getting people saying, well, what you keep arguing for? Well, forget, it's a long time ago, many years ago. And her answer to that was, go and look at the photographs, go and listen to the tapes, and you can see why I say keep them in prison.
The public often think, how could you represent somebody who's done terrible things? As a lawyer, it's very important for the system to work, that everybody is represented and well represented. It's what's called the Erskine Principle. It does not mean that you espouse their views of the world or that you are in any way empathizing with their criminality. You're doing it because they tell you they didn't do it or they did it but in certain circumstances, and you become their legal representative and advocate.
Inevitably, in this country, someone would start campaigning for them to be released. It just happens. The public, as long as anyone could remember, would not be in favour of them being released. Certainly we weren't as individuals on the Daily Mirror.
By the time Myra Hindley was in her 60s, was suffering from cancer, had had no contact with Brady, I felt by that time, was there a purpose served in keeping her in prison? And there would be others who would say, yes, there was, because the crimes were so terrible.
One of the loudest voices calling for Hindley's release was campaigner Lord Longford, who believed that every offender, whatever their crime, could be rehabilitated.
Lord Longford decided that there should be some compassion shown to Myra Hindley and that she'd been very sorry for what she'd done and that she should be forgiven and perhaps given a date for release.
The Home Secretary had a difficult decision to make, and of course it went to courts as well. So I think it was difficult, but my position is, what is the purpose of keeping frail, elderly, ill people in jail? And I would have let her out. And I know that will make people angry, but I just don't think there's much point.
I don't regret that they stayed in prison and died there. Had I not have done what I done, Brady and Hindley would have been out walking free today because they'd have been dealt with one murder and one murder only instead of all the others that came about.
In 1987, Pauline Reed's body was discovered on Saddleworth Moor. But to this day, Keith Bennett's body is still missing.
It'll go down in history because it hadn't happened before. And people say, well, how do you feel? I say, well, I'm glad I took part in something and I helped to put away two people. Because if I hadn't done what I did, they'd have been out walking the streets. It's as simple as that. When I see the photographs, the mug shots, it takes you back to when you've seen them in real life. That was her, that was Brady. Evil, that was it, evil people.
It's always there and it's in people's subconscious. There was even a painting made with children's hands of the image.
That photograph did stay in the minds of people, and it became representative and iconic of female wickedness. That image was so powerful in keeping alive the idea that this was a truly wicked woman.
I later met Leslie Ann's mum. She had been looking for me for a long time. So we sat down, and when we were finished, Alan, her husband, he says, I want you to have this. And he handed me a brown box. Well, I said, not allowed to take presents and gifts. He says, this has got nothing to do with the police. This is from me and her. It had been done especially for me to Bob, our hero. And I just sat there and I said, don't you like it? I said, I can't say. I said, you know, all my years of going through and what I did, this is all I have. It's worth a gold clock with. You can't understand. And I was just choked up. I couldn't say anything. And he says, no, that's how we feel. We asked the chap in the shop to put that on that shield, and that was our thoughts about you.